Welcome to the Sacred 8 Roadshow, where cosmic love meets conscious living.
We're Zsuzsi and Nikki, partners in life and purpose, and we're so glad you're here.
This podcast is a space for truth tellers, heart healers, and those walking the path of deep love and self-remembrance.
We'll explore human design, emotional wisdom, and the real work of conscious relationship.
And we're proudly sponsored by Hello Zia, your 24/7 AI relationship coach for healing, growth, and sacred love.
Let's dive in. Today we had the pleasure of interviewing Trudie Giordano.
Trudie is a master clinical hypnotherapist, energy healer, and spiritual coach with over 27 years of lived experience in recovery.
Her journey through addiction and healing inspires her work helping others break free from limiting patterns, release old wounds, and reconnect with their authentic selves.
We spoke with Trudie about her own journey, how to handle a loved one with addiction, and got granular about what it takes to heal.
We hope you enjoy her insights as much as we did.
This episode discusses addiction, which may be triggering for some listeners. If you or someone you love is struggling, you are not alone. You can contact the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration Helpline at 1-800-662-4357 for free confidential support available 24/7. If you are in immediate danger, please call 911 or your local emergency services.
And now for our episode.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to our sacred circle. Pull up a chair, pull up a pillow, get comfortable. If you're driving, not too comfortable. And today we are welcoming a very special guest. She is a friend of ours from Mount Shasta. Where else? The fabulous Trudie, who is going to be talking to us about a heavy topic. We're going to be talking about addiction, but it's going to be through a very unique lens. So, Trudie, why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about your 27 plus year journey with sobriety and how you got there?
Well, thank you so much for having me on your program. I do believe this is such an important topic. And yes, while I am all about love and light and high vibing, I deal with a lot of very heavy topics with the work that I do in hypnotherapy and coaching. As you mentioned, over 27 years ago, I hit another bottom in my life where I didn't feel like it was worth living. And I had been in that place before as a teenager when I tried acting on it and didn't succeed. So when I found myself there again at the age of 30, I knew that, there was help out there. There were tools, there were options. I just needed to be willing to seek them out. And I will say that I still resisted the idea that I had an addiction. I knew I was depressed. I knew I was maybe, abusing some substances or overusing a little bit to numb the pain and to cope. But I didn't really understand addiction and cross addiction the way that I do now, and understanding also that they call it a family disease. I don't know that I, would call it a disease model, but it does fit in the sense that it's a system. It's systemic. There's different roles that sort of keep the addiction going, and those roles can be taken on in the workplace or in the family or with friends. And so sometimes, quite often, when people get into recovery, they may change jobs or they may change their lifestyle or their friend group if those people are not changing with them to support them as a non-drinker or a non-smoker or a non-drug user or whatever it is that they're shifting their identity to within recovery. So my journey was working through depression and an addiction, and I learned a lot about cross addiction. Looking at substances and behaviors. I think I was fortunate in that way when I participated in an intensive program to be with other people struggling with addiction that was gambling and shopping and sex and love and relationships. And, there's all different kinds of expressions, but we all had common compulsive drives or that common trauma we were escaping or, using ineffective coping mechanisms to deal with.
Cross addiction. I think that's the first time I've heard that term. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So cross addiction is that oftentimes there are multiple substances or behaviors that might be present that somebody can engage with addictively. And sometimes when they clear up one particular addiction, another one may be stronger. So, for example, when I work with people to help them quit smoking, oftentimes I'll give them sessions on weight loss or managing their appetite when it comes to, food or alcohol, because they may substitute when they one addiction, they'll substitute another one if they aren't really learning the roots of why they're acting out addictively or why they feel compelled to numb out or to escape. And so the path of recovery really is looking at, kind of digging out those weeds, if you will, and planting the strengths and coping skills and things that a person wants to be. Or, again, I think of it in terms of identity because, again, with hypnotherapy, I'll take somebody who's a smoker and remind them they were born a non-smoker and work on having an identity of a non-smoker. And a non-smoker doesn't have ashtrays everywhere and doesn't have, there's different behaviors and things that will just automatically change themselves when they don't identify with being, a smoker. And they have the power then to be with smokers and not partake because they identify as a non-smoker. And that's really very powerful. And that's just something, at the subconscious level that looks at changing the reactions we have to various triggers so that they're healthy reactions and healthy coping mechanisms. And it's not really about aversion and avoiding, because when it comes to using food addictively, for example, somebody can't avoid food, or somebody may not want to avoid sex or other things they might be addicted to. It's about engaging with it appropriately in a healthy way and really resolving, the trauma or the neglect or the inside response, the thing in which they're acting out addictively over. And the reason that I mention that it's kind of a systemic thing and it happens within families is that somebody may have trouble with boundaries, or they may have trouble trusting, or they may have a lot of issues that can be traced back to addiction, and whether they themselves ended up using a substance or not. Often people growing up in an alcoholic or addictive kind of home, they may swear off and they may not do anything addictively with a substance or a behavior, but they have a lot of learned responses from being part of that system that may lower their self-esteem or may create trust issues. And so there's just so many things that are part of that system that when somebody learns more about that, they can not only better support somebody in their life that may be recovering from addiction, but they also may see within themselves things that they want to change that are patterns and responses or a part of their identity that was formed by being in a system with alcoholism or drug addiction or some other kind of addiction.
Well, I love that you call it systemic. And the reason I love your approach and everything that I've heard you say about people being in addiction recovery is that I heard for so many years that alcoholism is a disease, like addiction is a disease. And I was like, well, I don't know why, but that just never sat right with me. And I would love to share a little bit more about like what I've experienced with addiction in terms of like my own sort of compulsive behavior and having been married to somebody who is an alcoholic, although he would never to this day probably never admit that he ever had a drinking problem. But I really wanted to actually invite our third host, Zia, to give us like a holistic working definition of addiction so that we can look at it from that perspective. Hello, Zia. Can you give us a holistic, brief definition of addiction?
Absolutely. I'm right here with you. So at its heart, addiction is really a pattern where someone finds themselves repeatedly drawn to a behavior or a substance, even when it's causing harm or not truly in alignment with their well-being. It's not about judging that behavior. It's more about understanding that the root often lies in trying to cope with something deeper, like emotional pain, stress, or unmet needs. And from a holistic standpoint, we look at the whole person, body, mind, emotions, and spirit, to gently understand what's underneath that pattern.
Thank you so much, Zia.
What did you think?
I think, it's important, as was mentioned, to not judge and to understand that it's coping and it's survival. It's not a moralistic weakness or failure. It's someone doing the best they can with, granted ineffective, as it was mentioned, it can harm them, but, there's a feeling of, I don't know what else to do, and unless sometimes there's either an intervention or they're willing to, get the help that they need and seek that support, it's a vicious cycle. And I cannot stress enough the shame that can happen with a person who feels like they should have the willpower. They don't really understand that their body is maybe protecting them from things that are really difficult to look at and really hard to process. And if they find a place of safety, or they find a group, or whether it's a recovery group or a counselor or somebody to share that with, who really understands addiction and the stories the mind can tell and all the things, they can really judge themselves harshly and hide it. And those feelings of shame and low self-esteem are really crippling and damaging. And I'd love to share with any addict listening that they're unnecessary. I mean, I get it, and I've been there. And one of the things, actually, too, when I first heard it, that made me say, you know what, I'm an alcoholic, I mean, it fits, is when they talked about incomprehensible demoralization. That term hit me. I was like, I know what that is. I know how that feels. And to be so demoralized, you can't even wrap your mind around it. I just feel like that's the thing that I want to shower with compassion, to shower with hope, to say that, it can be really dark and it is really hard hitting bottom, but then the only way is up. I mean, it does take humility, which can be really hard. I think that the ego gets in the way. It wants to control, and no, I'm not weak, because they're buying into that cultural sort of moralization that you must be weak-willed if you can't just, quit cigarettes or just control your drinking, or, whatever it is. Not recognizing that is a coping mechanism that enables the person to be able to relate to other people. I'm not the first one to say it, but I definitely would agree that addiction is a symptom of a lack of connection. And part of what I really focus on when I help people with addiction, and that I work on and have worked on with myself, is that connection to oneself, connection to spirit, source, life, God, whatever a person identifies that to be, and, connection to others. And to be comfortable and to be able to feel that connection when those things typically were maybe not as healthy growing up in that system. There were certain skewed dynamics that make that connection difficult and make someone distrust those connections. And so healing that and, addressing that, and again, focusing on the true identity of being somebody who is connected to life, who is someone who is resilient, who can make different choices within any moment and can choose to create and reinvent themselves in a way that is now someone who, has, again, it's not a switch of, okay, now I have all this self-control, but it's, I can be a person who can be around these things and not be drawn in, or I can be a person who moderates, my behavior and so forth. Uh, Once I've done the healing, or once I've gotten the tools or I've done the work, like maybe I can't do it alone. Maybe I've tried and I've failed, but that doesn't mean I'm broken. That doesn't mean I cannot heal and move forward. I just need the right tools and the right supports, and to have a better understanding, again, of what those causes are. And oftentimes that does involve healing, trauma from the past, but it can be easier than people think. I'm not going to say it's easy or fun, but it's possible and it's so worth it. And it doesn't need to take years and years. I've had a lot of years of being very happy and balanced in my recovery. So it's not that somebody's finally going to get there after 27 years. I mean, you can get there a lot sooner when you help you need.
So something that I wasn't planning to ask you, but has just come up for me because, the way that you speak about making the decision to seek help, or like recognizing, oh, this is a problem and I would like some assistance with it, and now helping people with this recognition. But there are a lot of people out there who actually do not recognize that there's a problem. So my question to you is kind of twofold. What would you say to somebody who has a family member who seems to not want to accept these things about themselves? What would you say to them? And then maybe there is somebody who's reluctantly being, pushed at you, like, you fix it, like you do the thing that we can't seem to get through and all of that stuff. So they're really in front of you, but they don't want to be. How can the family be heard? Obviously, saying the same thing to their loved one over and over and over again has not resulted in them wanting to be better or to get clean. So what would you say to them to help them kind of have a different kind of conversation? And then also, what would you say to somebody who's like, I don't have a problem, like I don't even know why I'm here?
Maybe not even that you don't have a problem, but you're just in such a deep dark hole at this point that you don't really see the way out. So you're like, what's the point? Or you just don't seem to want to get the help. You have a problem, but you've been to multiple rehabs, you've been to therapy, you've done all this work, but you're not making any progress.
How is hypnotherapy different?
So a couple things, because there's a lot there. And so I want to just touch on a few things. One is, denial is cunning, baffling, and powerful. And it is, it's a real thing, because there's some ego death involved in any sort of redefining oneself and moving forward, or, having any sort of breakthrough that might be along the lines of spiritual in nature. Those types of things tend to reduce the ego, and the ego is going to put up a lot of resistance to that. And that's where denial comes in. No, I've got this. I don't need help. You're blowing it out of proportion, or this or that. And so part of how hypnotherapy works is it's bypassing the ego and the conscious mind, and we're working with programming at the subconscious level. So that's one thing. For families, I would say that the more they can understand the dynamics of the system. One of the early books I read was called Adult Children of Alcoholics, because even though my parents were, I would say, religious addicts, they didn't drink very much, but their parents, both sets of my grandparents, were alcoholic. And my grandma got into recovery in 1963, so I did know about AA and recovery, and that definitely helped me in my path. But in any case, I feel like if the family understands more about codependency and enabling, and just the process of sort of threats and emotional entanglement and those kinds of things, and they work on themselves. Al-Anon is the group for the family members of alcoholics, and I don't know if there's, Narcanon or other types of side groups, that are supporting the families around the addict. But in general, it's a lot of education around not being codependent, not being as involved and fixated on the person. And it's letting natural consequences take shape, because when somebody relapses, when they have had a taste of recovery and they go back out there, they talk about within recovery that they're gathering more data. They have to go out there and determine that they still can't use responsibly or drink responsibly or maybe hang out with those friends. They're still kind of learning that this doesn't lead anywhere good. And one of the biggest things, though, as far as grasping recovery and holding on and making progress, is feeling worthy of it. And that is a big thing that I work on with hypnosis, is people's subconscious beliefs about their worthiness. And those can be very deep-seated, and oftentimes it's pre-language, the memories or the experiences or the things that program someone to feel that they are not worth the help, or they're not worth saving, or the life isn't worth living, or it's not worth the effort or the work, and they're just going for that escape. They're going for that numbing. And it can be really difficult work at first, because it's like taking off a Band-Aid. I don't know if that's the greatest analogy. It's like, but everything is exposed and everything is sensitive. And if you've been pushing down anger and hurt and betrayal and resentment and all the things that you're numbing out, and you take that substance away or that behavior away, that stuff comes up, and that stuff needs to be looked at. And if you're simultaneously reprogramming your subconscious mind, whether it's with a hypnotherapist or using subliminals or other tools. Thankfully, there's many tools out there now to reprogram yourself into being someone that you believe is worthy of building a life that you enjoy being in. And again, getting the help and the input, books, podcasts, authors, therapists, coaches. There's a lot to find your flavor, find who resonates with you and who has walked a similar path. So for anyone who might be experiencing alcoholism or addiction of some sort, there's generally, when it comes to group meetings, they're online and things, there's what they call speaker meetings, and that's where nobody's sharing. They don't have to share or announce who they are or any of that. They're just listening to somebody who said, this is what happened to me, and this is how I got where I went, and this is, what's happened since then. And so if they go to those types of meetings, sometimes they'll hear a speaker who had something that they resonate with and relate to, and then they can find out more from them. But another thing they say in recovery is that you can't bullshit a bullshitter. So that's where, if somebody's coming to me and, or in other meetings of alcoholics or addicts, there's a lot of laughter, because we recognize all those lies that people are telling themselves and the excuses that they're making and all that. And there's no judgment. It's so much love. I mean, we've been there and we've done that, and it didn't work for us, and now we're building these healthier, happier lives filled with connection that's healthy, and wanting to share that with others that are hurting and, lift them up and out of that say, there's tools, there's ways. Now, for some, AA can be pretty strict. There are even some meetings that are very strict where people think prescription medicine is bad. Personally, I don't feel that, I think that harms reduction, which I learned a lot about when I worked up in Oregon, is an approach where someone who, let's say, if they're addicted to heroin, then maybe they're on methadone, and it's controlled and it's prescribed. And so they're not in an alleyway with a dirty needle or something. And that brings less harm to them and their family in their journey toward being free of, any substance. And so I feel like it's important to meet people where they are. And it's important to help them understand what progress looks like and to celebrate that progress and to keep moving forward on this path toward, again, being the person they feel they truly are without the trauma and the fears and the negative reactions. There's a lot of cleaning up of the neighborhood between the years. They say it can be a dangerous place to be in that neighborhood by yourself when you're an addict. And so cleaning up that thinking and cleaning up, having the positive. That's why there's all those little sayings and things, to let go and let God, or whatever it is that helps you in that moment, not react in the way that you conditioned yourself or kind of been conditioned, that conditioned response that is an unhealthy response. Being able to short circuit that or step in with a different thought or a different behavior. And, subconscious reprogramming with hypnosis just fast tracks that. There's still a lot of work involved in living a life of recovery, but I feel it helps accelerate things quite a bit. And I know for myself, I did, the 12-step path, but I also became a hypnotherapist back then in 2002. So I was sponsoring a lot of women and then using hypnosis and helping people just get that neighborhood cleaned up and get those thoughts working in their favor and helping with their worthiness.
I love that. So just to kind of like, because I know it was like a complicated two-part question, you talked about families and not enabling and the entanglements and all of that stuff, which is really important to understand. Obviously, if somebody finally gets to a point where they're willing to give it a try, but it's really only because they're being pushed by their family, how do you approach that?
I think, again, that the person really needs to want it for themselves in order for it to last. There definitely are people that get in there because they got a DUI or they're court ordered or because a spouse is going to leave them or something. And it's, they do succeed. They get in there, just like I went reluctantly, and I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to this intensive thing because I don't want to live and I'm very depressed. It's not because I'm overusing alcohol or anything else.
Sure.
I still had a bit of denial, and I knew full well that it ran in the family, or that, it could very well be an issue. And I still didn't want to identify myself in that way. And so even if there's resistance to your question, if somebody is going because it's an intervention or because they're trying to keep the peace, there's still the chance, if they're willing, to be open. I mean, they say the how of recovery stands for honesty, openness, and willingness. And you cannot give somebody willingness, just like, you can bring a horse to water, you can't make them drink. So you can show them that the tools are there. They can be in a room with other recovering addicts, which I feel is really, really valuable. Because again, you may not have it as bad as so-and-so over there, or maybe it's worse, but then you start to kind of see the commonalities. And it's important, I think, for people who are experiencing some form of addictive behavior, that they understand that it's a path that's going to a bad end. I don't know how else to put it. And if they aren't at that bad end. It's just that they're not there yet.
Mm.
That's where it's going. They say, you're either going to prison or death, or hospital. Those are the three destinations.
Right.
Hospital, death, or prison. And so, if you can understand and you get into a room with other people talking about their stories and their struggles, yours may not be as bad, but if you listen to enough, you can say, well, gee, I see where that person is at that I used to be at, but now I've progressed to this point and I'm not that bad, but that's just not yet. If I keep going, I could get, whatever the laced substance or the DUI or the hospitalization or the car accident or what have you. And, so it's a progressive, I think maybe that's where the disease model kind of comes in, where they say it's a progressive disease. I think with some things, certainly people who, have sugar addiction, or I don't know, there's some other type of substance where maybe you can't completely avoid it, but you can understand how to use it responsibly. That, again, that can be tricky. I think that I really advise people to come into it in terms of wanting to shift their identity to what is more authentic for them. And if they're looking at it in that way, then they understand that that's going to take some shifts, and that might be shifts in their activities or their companions or what have you, at least for a time, so that they can understand, oh, I can go to a pool party now and not have the urge to drink. But for a time, that might be a slippery slope. That might be a place I don't want to put myself in because there's going to be all this temptation around. And until I'm solid in my identity, until I've maybe, lost the weight, I'm not going to go into a bakery or, whatever it is, that you want to achieve a goal, you're setting certain parameters and you're feeling you're worth it to stick to those commitments. I liked what you said before about making the decision, because that's really what it is. You make a decision. This isn't the life I want to live. I want to be living in this way. What are the beliefs and the behaviors and the things that are preventing me from living my most authentic, healthiest life? And in that, hypnotherapy can be a gold mine, because it really strips away those limiting beliefs and those limiting behaviors. It does take some repetition, because we can repeat the bad behaviors for a really long time. And, so you want to repeat the positive programming, but it is more influential, I think, to have that programming changed at the subconscious level, as well as consciously learning new ways of behaving and being that align, with someone's highest values.
I've really heard you hit on just about everything that I did with quitting smoking. So it took me 7 tries, but I really remember needing to shift that identity to start seeing myself as a non-smoker. I never really liked it to begin with, but it was the cool thing to do. My friends were doing it, and I fell into that peer pressure group. And I can remember, and then you talk about the relapse and how each one is data, and it was for me. Every time I learned something new, and by the last time what I realized was the hardest step was just getting up the mentality and the guts to quit again. Like, just the stopping for those first couple weeks was the hardest. And I also, there were several years I didn't go into a convenience store anywhere that sold cigarettes. And how many times since then, if something really difficult in my life comes up, that I use those same principles. I'm like, if I quit smoking, I can do this. And then I try that mentality back to, this is how I did this, so maybe that's how I can get through this tough time as well.
You bring up something really important, and congratulations on quitting smoking, because that's super addictive. So it's not easy. And that is that the mind, again, I was kind of talking about the resistance that the ego puts up. And if it's telling in that bad neighborhood that, well, you're a loser, you're not going to be able to quit, you tried before and you failed, and this and this and this, it's about not surrendering to that, because when you give whatever those limiting beliefs and voices and whatnot a run for their money, and you're the one in the driver's seat of your mind and your brain, as opposed to just surrendering to those kinds of thoughts. You do you are rewiring your brain, and you are building. It's almost like a muscle, where again, each time that you choose and decide that now I'm sticking to this commitment that I made to myself, not only is that building your self-esteem, but it is weakening that the power and the pull of that resistance and of the excuses or faulty logic, the dialogue that happens that pulls somebody into it. So it's important to not surrender to that, and to have the tools and do the things, even if it's avoiding certain places, and until it is easier for you. And during the pandemic, I got onto some online meetings. I'd already had a lot of sobriety by then, and I hadn't gone as much to some of the 12-step meetings. I branched into different things, but I felt like this is some pretty crazy stuff right now, and to stay grounded, and just to remind myself of the principles and the thinking and the things that got me sober and were keeping me sober. So in that sense, it can be an ongoing thing where eventually I don't have to think about not wanting to drink. I'm a non-drinker. I don't drink, and I don't miss it, and I don't have the urge. But I recognize that, emotionally, I didn't feel like I was doing so well during the lockdown. So I took steps to protect my sobriety in that instance.
And it really, I think one of the key things you hit on that I really did too was, and this was hard to do because there wasn't a lot of people around me that didn't smoke. But when I found someone who had either quit or didn't, or never smoked it before, I just watched everything they did. When we went to a bar and had some food and a couple drinks, what did they do when everybody else went out to smoke? When we were hanging around the garage and we're all smoking, what were they doing? It was always, let me emulate whatever it is that they're, even if I wasn't at a point where I had quit yet, I was still going, okay, well, this is how I can respond in these situations, because this is what they're doing.
Yeah, no, that's very smart. Just, modeling after a non-smoker, and that could be anybody, using, whether it's exercise or other habits that people have healthy, that we say, well, if you want what they have, be willing to do what they did.
Exactly.
So that's another thing from recovery. I'm not the one coming up with these, but they're handy, and they come, they are true. And so, that's something I just like to share with people, that again, recovery is possible and it's worth it. And don't, give up on yourself if you're somebody who is struggling and doesn't think you can make it, or feels like you failed before.
I had a really hard time saying that I was married to an alcoholic. I used to say drinking problem all the time, because if he didn't identify himself as an alcoholic, then what right did I have to identify him as such? And one of the reasons why I didn't is because there is no alcoholism in my family, so I have never really been a witness to it. And the second thing is that he was highly functional. So a lot of movies and shows and things like that, where I saw people demonstrating alcoholism, it was messy, it was gross, it was really non-sustainable. And yet I was witnessing somebody who had very clearly set up their entire life in a really organized and functional way, so that drinking could be a part of that. And when we were breaking up and I was saying for the first time how I felt about this, I mean, we had fights about him getting too drunk. And so all that really did was give him the notice that he can't do that in front of me. That didn't mean that he couldn't do it. He just had to be smarter about it. Right? And so he did. He became much smarter about how he went about things. But the overall like experience of it was not that I was living with a messy person or a non-functional person or somebody who was irresponsible. He was early to everything. He balanced his checkbook on a daily basis, saved every receipt he ever, like, so
High functioning.
the money was fine. The job was fine. Seemingly his relationships were fine, but he was not fine. And when you were talking about that connection piece, that's what it really was for me, because you cannot be in a relationship with an alcoholic. They're in a relationship with alcohol, not you. And most of the time, you don't know who you're speaking to. You don't know if you're speaking to sober them or drunk them or hungover them. Because, like I said, they're functional. There were times when he went a little overboard and he kind of like fell off this cliff, is what I like to call it, where it was literally just one drink too many, and then it was on the floor, like, you know, messy, but not sick. Got up and went for a run the next day, things like that. So these are like the kinds of things that people don't necessarily talk about in terms of addiction. Like seemingly everything's fine.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's some really, really valuable things in what you said. One was sort of the compulsive nature of where he was controlling a lot of things, compulsively, which is part of the addictive cycle. I mean, there's a lot of addicts and alcoholics that are very ambitious, successful people. So it isn't necessarily, something that is identifying as somebody who's, sitting in an alleyway and hasn't showered in days and whatnot. I mean, that certainly wasn't my story. They talk about high bottom, and that's if somebody, like for me, I feel that because my grandma was in recovery and I knew about it, even though I was depressed and I wanted to end my life, I still had a job. I was in a marriage, I wasn't blackout drinking or any of those things. Yet I fully recognized myself in the patterns and in the description. And that emotional unavailability that you alluded to, that relationship with the substance or the activity or the behavior, that is the thing that's giving the addict the emotional hit or fulfillment. That is the thing that they trust. That is the thing that they turn to. Again, whether it's cigarettes, alcohol, pills, gambling, online porn addiction, sex addiction, those types of things. They are not emotionally available. And back to what I was saying earlier about that connection, they're not connected emotionally to themselves or to other people in their lives or to their source or God or higher self or however you term that. And so without that connection, they're very hyper focused on the thing that they think is getting them through, the thing that they think is numbing or shutting out the trauma and the pain and the things that they're escaping, including their life that they're making a mess of, and the guilt and the shame of letting people down and letting themselves down and not being able to, quote unquote, get a handle on it. And I feel like, again, that learning more about what it is and having compassion for oneself in that process. Again, another saying from recovery, they say, let us love you until you can love yourself. Because people who come to those meetings, again, they don't feel worthy. Most often they do not feel worthy of, they feel they've let everyone down, they've let themselves down. If they don't have their coping mechanism anymore, and that's taken away, what do they have? Now they're not even enjoying themselves, and if they've lost their friends, because if their friends are all using or drinking and they can't be around that anymore, it takes a lot of courage, to pick up the pieces and to say, I do deserve more and I can create more and I'm moving forward. And it's inspiring to know that people younger and younger and younger are getting a clue, figuring it out, not waiting until they've been through several jobs and marriages and whatever else has been destroyed to get into recovery. So in a lot of meetings, there are a lot of younger people now, but you can go on any day of the week if you want to go and see people that stayed in it a lot longer and made a much bigger mess of their lives, and see the path that you're on and decide, maybe today's the day that I choose something different, because I don't want to go down that path. I don't want to end up with the level of guilt and regret and shame that that other person has who's been at it a lot longer. But on the surface, it can look great. Somebody can be high functioning, especially with love and sex addicts. They can have completely separate lives, and you don't even know that that stuff is happening on the side or under the surface. But if you know about, the emotional availability or the lack thereof, and you understand sort of in the system of the family, the way in which the addiction disrupts the whole family and the whole family system, and you don't step in to that role that might be expected, it is hard. I get you. It is very hard, but it is necessary. That is what's going to wake the addict up. They're going to keep trying to do whatever they think is working until it's not working anymore. And when the substance or the behavior isn't working anymore, and the reliable people that were just wanted to help them do better, there's no judgment. Everybody's doing the best they can. But if they were enabling the person unknowingly, that has to stop working anymore. Anything that was, part of the world of that was holding it together for them to continue to use or drink really has to fall apart and fall away. And yeah, I think sometimes people have to get to a place where the pain of, change is less than the pain of staying the same. And they just can't endure that pain of staying the same anymore. And so they're willing to walk through the pain of change, And I help people when I work with them to know that there's going to be some resistance. Your ego may put up a fight, or you may want to go for that easy fix of, whoever or whatever that's going to make you feel better. But if you don't surrender to that, and you can stay, committed and take these new actions and these new behaviors, it gets easier and easier. It really does. It is like a muscle, and pretty soon you're not crawling, you're walking, and you're running, and then you're, looking back, and your old life is like a distant memory.
So being somebody that's on the outside, that chose not to be an enabler, and just it was kind of the black sheep for it for a long time, because I was the only one. But now there's some other family members on board with me, but it's not that we don't care. It's not that we're not sitting over here on the sideline rooting for you to become better, to decide to go and get the help, decide that you're ready to change. And we almost can't wait for you to come knock on our door and go, look what I did. It's not, we haven't given up. We're just really trying to take any of the means that allows you to continue on that same path.
Yeah. And, I feel the encouragement that I typically give is either instead of or in addition to saying what I can't do, is saying what I can do. I can't give you money to go use for drugs or alcohol, or to offset the consequences, the natural consequences of the choices that you've made. But I can give you a ride to a meeting, or I can introduce you to this podcast or this healer or this book, or, I do want to see you recover and grow and be healthy. And I know that you're worth it. And, I'm there for you in any way I can be that supports your health and recovery. I just am not there to support the deferment of the consequences of your actions, because that's only going to prolong your escapism or your using or your destructive behavior. And so I'm not going to be the buffer that's going to defer those consequences and prolong the situation you're in. However, what I can do, and then whatever feels authentic to you to be able to offer in a way of love and help and support. I mean, some family members can't have the person in their home because they'll steal from them, and things like that, depending on the addiction. And so they, I can't let you in our home, but I can meet you at a coffee shop, or I can meet you at the library where they're going to have a meeting. Really, attending meetings, open meetings that are open to guests. Again, people have different, I won't say misconceptions, because I think sometimes it's accurate. Some of them can seem like they're their own church or cult, or it's a whole nother addiction, or just the way that people relate to it can be a turnoff. But they're not all like that. People can shop around for different styles of meetings and different focus of the meeting. If it's a fireside beach meeting, it's going to have a different vibe than if it's in a church, So it's kind of finding the people that you would have drank or used drugs with in a sober environment. Like you could still find your people that were who you would have hung out with before, only now they got sober or now they're clean. And you're learning from them because they're going to understand you way better than anybody else who has not walked in your shoes. And that's the part where, going back to the you can't bullshit a bullshitter, like we pull each other's covers in that environment where, yeah, you're not going to like it and you don't want to wake up, but your life is waiting, So I'm here doing you a favor to gently pull your covers with so much love and compassion because I've been there, but I also know that you don't want to let your life slip by being numbed out and driving the people who love you and care about you away, or feeling filled with shame because you are engaging in behaviors that don't align with who you are in your truest essence. So I'm very passionate about helping people get aligned with their true essence and feel that their life is worth living and know that that seed or kernel or, their essence within them, it's there, and it might be covered and clouded with a lot of debris and false beliefs and trauma and neglect and all different kinds of stuff. And we don't have to unpack all that and look at that and relive any of that to get past it. Some of that may come up and it's hard, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that, you can suppress your feelings for years and then still not feel them when you stop doing that. You're going to feel things, but you can learn tools to process that feeling without getting overwhelmed by it. And you can, again, learn new behaviors and new beliefs that will serve you much better.
Thank you so much, Trudie. I feel like we've gotten so many gold nuggets from this conversation. I can't wait to share this episode with some people that I know. So why don't you, if there's anything else that you feel like has been unsaid, let us know. And also let us know where people can find you.
So my website is itisdone.com, and there's dashes in between. It-is-done.com. And I also am working on a book for adults. I've written a couple of kids' books, but the book for adults is going to have a lot of tools in it that I've used in my recovery and with clients, and emotional regulation and setting boundaries and just a lot of different topics. So you can watch for more from me on that when that gets released in a couple of months. I'm here, I'm around in Mount Shasta, and I also have an office in Redding, and I do sessions remotely over Zoom.
Fabulous. We'll also drop your TikTok and your Instagram in the show notes, along with your website and your contact information, whatever you'd like to share with our audience, because we're really here to spread the love, right? Spread the information, spread the healing. And we have been to a couple of your group hypnotherapy sessions. We're going to one tonight. Excited about that. So there's a lot that we personally have gotten from you, and we were really excited to have this conversation. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you again for having me. I really appreciate the work that you're doing to reach people in this way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us in this sacred circle.
If today's conversation moved something in you, share it, journal it, or bring it into your next moment of love.
And remember, you're not alone. Z is here to support your journey anytime you need her.
Until next time, stay grounded, stay open, and stay true.
With love, always.